Registered for today. A couple dozen people registered for today. We'll see who shows up in the next minute or so while we're all just kind of settling in. Um, my name's Jim Smith. I'm a member of the ACTO board, uh, and um, I'm going to be one of your co-hosts for today, along with my colleague Jagruti in the pink. Um, So as we are arriving and settling in for this preview, I invite everybody to literally settle in. Just if you haven't already, maybe take a moment to give yourself permission to be here now in this conversation. Um, I love opening up with coaching audiences because everybody in the room kind of gets that concept. Um, you ever been a speaker in a room where you have to walk people through the concept of breathing, like before you can ask them to center? And coaches, I like to believe, mostly know how to do that already. Um, so let's just do it for ourselves. And scanning the audience, I'd like to give a special shout out to Peter Redding, who's in the room today, who is one of the founders of Acto back at the beginning of the millennium, which is just a few minutes ago. And here we are today. So thanks for joining us, Peter. Um, Again, my name's Jim Smith. I am obviously a white married male living in the U.S. Um, I raised a multicultural group of kids, both adopted and birth, and I currently operate both as a freelance coach and as a member of faculty for three different coaching schools in the U.S., Singapore, and Mumbai. So I love the global approach that Acto has been leaning into much more heavily in the last few years. And I'd like to introduce my co-host and let her introduce herself, and she can kind of walk us through what we're going to do in the next 85 minutes or so.
Thank you, Jim. Hello, everyone, all the way from India. It is 8:35 p.m. my time, and I'm looking forward to this evening together with all of you. So I'm a coach trainer. I'm the director of mentoring with this coach training school here, which was founded in the US, but we now operate from India, called Leadership That Works India. And I'm also an executive and transformational coach. I work with a variety of clients from, CXOs to single women to youth. And I'm particularly proud about the fact that I've also taken all of this training and this approach into a nonprofit that I've founded in the city where I live. And I have trained my team, and we deploy this and take these methodology to people who would not have access to it otherwise for self-exploration and rising to more power. So it's a full plate all the time. And today I'm really looking forward to meeting with everyone and getting a little taste of our conference. What else about me? I think I was supposed to say other things. I am the happy mother of two young men who live in the United States. I have close ties to that country. And I'm single. And just before coming on the call, I read a delightful post on Instagram about how single women, boyfriends are not necessary because there's so much else that fills their life. And so I'm riding in on that joyful wave. And we have three of our speakers here today to share with us a little bit about what they're going to talk about. Not all, of course, but just a little sneak peek. So we get excited, we get primed up. Our objective is that we build collective energy to bring in this conference for which we are kind of putting in a lot of love and effort at the back end to make it an excellent experience for all the participants. And today we have Ariana. Ariana, you could raise your hand if I say your name, and Christina and Damaris, who will be sharing with us a little bit about what they want to present. We also have, I think, a couple of other people who are going to speak at the conference and are here with us as well. Yes, yes, thank you. So it's exciting. What we're going to do is we're going to line it up so that we engage with one person at a time. They will do a little presentation, after which we can have some questions, maybe, and just it's informal space. So all of us own it together. We don't really have something very streamlined, but yes, we do want all our speakers to have good enough time when they're speaking. So at some point, you might find Jim or me stepping in to shape and put a stop to questions and the conversation because we'd like to move on to the next speaker. I think speakers have timed themselves to speak for around 7 to 10 minutes, and then we have roughly another 10 to 12 minutes of engagement before we move. Am I right, Jim, on the timing? Okay.
Yep.
We also have our other board member, Hallie, who's also part of the conference committee. And anything you want to say, Hallie, before we kick off?
Nope. I see Bear here too. So, hello.
Oh, yeah. Where is our board member?
Oh, Sammy's here.
Indeed. Along
There
with,
you are.
so Sammy is going to be one of our day 2 speakers, and Jonathan Sibley is going to be helping us, well, facilitating our plenary session on day 2, to bring everybody into the conversation. Looking forward to that, Jonathan.
And
Yeah.
Joanna Davis.
Have Joanna Davis with us.
Indeed.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right.
Hey.
All right. So,
starting with Ariane.
Well, so let's just take a moment to set the context first, okay? So I just put a link into the chat. I'm actually, based on the list of people here, I think you're all either on the panel or you're I might have seen you register already, but just in case not, here's a link to the conference homepage. And a reminder that our theme this year is humans first. Embedding social identity differences in coaching and coach training. And our goal in putting together this year's program is to really highlight the power and the value and the importance of paying attention to context and culture and social identity and the differences that we bring as coaches and the differences that our clients bring into the room with them, that they want to be acknowledged and seen for as part of their coaching experience. So that's what a lot of our conversations are going to be about. So with that said, why don't we dive into our first piece? You want to introduce Ariane Jacoudi?
Yes. Hello, Ariane.
Hi.
I'm not going to do spotlighting because, this way we keep it kind of informal, but very, very, very happy to welcome you. Ariane likes to be known as a proud New Yorker by birth and at heart. She is married and the parent of a daughter, currently navigating the layered power dynamics of blending households and building relationships with children not biologically her own. She values truth-telling, spiritual grounding, and creating space for people to show up as their full selves. And Ariane, I'm going to invite you to name your connection to coach training because by the time you were doing it, I was busy juggling with my audio feedback and I missed that little piece. So sorry.
Yeah, no, hi, good morning. And where I am, it is Baltimore, not New York, but thank you. I do claim my New York identity, even though I haven't lived there for a long time, but I think New Yorkers and people from other places do that too. So yes, I am affiliated with the Georgetown Institute for Transformational Leadership. I serve on their board. I went through that program back in 2020. It was indeed transformational and the beginning of my introduction to coaching. And I came to coaching from facilitation and spent about 10 years facilitating both the work of Brene Brown in courage and vulnerability and how we show up bravely, and also incorporating that into the work I did. Well, I still do, but I did it very intentionally at the time as an ordained Episcopal priest. So the last 15 years in my leadership growth, part of my career story is that I was a priest in a congregation, navigating a lot of the ways in which we show up as leaders and as full human beings and connect with one another. And one of the reasons I so threw myself into coaching, which is now my full-time job, is because it really honors the domain of spirituality. The domain of spirituality is where we do make heart-to-heart connections with other people. And I think it requires a lot of vulnerability and a lot of courage. And so my presentation for this conference, and I was thrilled when I came across ACTO and this conference RFP and what it is that they are seeking to do, which has to do with being really, really clear about how our identity, both the identities that come into the space organically and the identities that people name and bring into the room, but also the identities that we are sometimes afraid of giving voice to, the identities that can get in the way of us making a real, true-hearted connection with another person in a coaching conversation. So with all that, yeah, I'm eager and I'm excited to tell you about this presentation that I'll be doing at the conference. And in full transparency with a group of colleagues, I'm eager and excited, and I'm also nervous, right? I'm scared. I've done this a million times before, and you are new to me, and I am new to you, and I have zero ability to control what it is you think about me, even though in the span of time that I have been talking to you, you've already formed some opinions. I know that is true. And I am curious if I'm the only one here, and it can be a show of hands, it can be a drop in the chat, but do you guys know what it's like to be both excited and nervous at the same time? Yeah, good, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate you engaging with me in this virtual space. I think one of the really valuable things we do as a coach is get a little bit better at naming and normalizing how vulnerability shows up in us. The word vulnerability is utilized now, overutilized, I would say. People throw it around as if we all understand what that word means and we all have the same experience of it. And that's just not true. What makes me a little bit nervous and scared may or may not make you a little bit nervous and scared. The ways in which I approach a coaching conversation is not the same way you approach a conversation. Jim, as you opened us up, you spoke to the fact that coaches know what it is to breathe. We know the value and importance of being a presence in a space, especially maybe even a virtual space, which I don't know about you, but that's where I do almost all of my coaching. And there is something very unique about what it is we do as we generate that space. And I would offer to you that if we don't know how to name vulnerability in ourselves, and if we don't get really good at understanding the identities that both serve us when we're feeling vulnerable, and more importantly, the identities that get in the way when vulnerability starts to happen, then I think we cut ourselves off from creating that container that coaches want to create when transformation happens. So let me ask you another question, if you don't mind. And this time I would like it if you could drop it in the chat. What's at risk in a coaching conversation? What's at risk in a coaching conversation? Ego, sense of self. Yep. Admitting something you're not ready to admit to yourself, not being perfect. Anything else? Not being understood? At risk for who? At risk for the coach, the coaches, the client? I don't know. You tell me. We're both at risk in a coaching conversation, the coach and the client. Not adding value, losing a client, disruption, disempowerment, being somewhere in between, an unbalance in the relationship, the possibility of deep, genuine, authentic connection. Yeah. So the definition of vulnerability, and here I am using Brené Brown's definition. It is risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. And I truly do not think you can have a transformational conversation. And I know that not all coaching conversations are transformational, but I don't even think you can have a conversation that brings some level of self-awareness if you're not willing to risk, to let go of certainty, and to be aware of the ways in which our feelings can be exposed with another person. Everything that people wrote, I think, falls under the rubric of being seen. And coaching at the edge is when we can notice vulnerability happening in real time because something is about to occur where either or both the coach and the client are going to allow themselves to be seen in service of something new being generated. Now, when you're feeling these feelings of risk, what happens in your body? I know for me, I get a little nervous, like in my stomach. I start to feel some butterflies. My hands are cold. I have a nice cup of warm tea here, supposed to hold as my transitional object, but also to warm my hands. How about you? What happens in your body when you're feeling a little bit nervous or anxious? I'd be grateful if you shared some of your answers in the chat. Chest tightness, yep. Clenching, tightening jaw. Yeah, I definitely have the shallow breathing, sweating. Everything floats in your head. You don't know where you are. You start to totally lose focus, shoulders tight. Start going really inward. Maybe, I don't know, sometimes I can start to center myself in a conversation, focusing a lot on what it is I'm hoping to achieve versus on meeting the client where they are. So all of which to say, vulnerability is a full body experience. How often have you heard somebody say, we need to be more vulnerable? I need to be vulnerable. Just saying that phrase indicates that you have some control over when and how you feel vulnerability. We don't. That's the whole point, right? When something new is about to emerge, when emergence is happening, we're not in control. But the better we are at recognizing it when it happens. I mean, if connection is a full body experience, right? An energetic experience between people, then vulnerability is a huge part of that. And we feel it in our bodies. We feel it in our feelings. And that's exactly what is influencing the questions or statements coming out of my mouth and the way in which I choose to be seen by you in the conversation. And sometimes it's hard being seen as the coach, right? A lot of the words that were put into that chat had to do with not always having the answers. What are some of the hard things we say in a coaching conversation? I know it's hard for me when I say to a client, I'm a little bit lost. I'm a little bit lost in what you're talking about. What's a phrase that might be hard for you to say in a coaching conversation? I don't know, unsure what to ask next. Yep, I'm bored. I don't even know if I've had the courage to tell somebody I'm bored, but I've definitely felt it. not knowing is a huge part of experiencing vulnerability. And so obviously already, I mean, I have notes right here, right, that I'm supposed to be following along perfectly, but I never follow along perfectly my notes, right? Because I'm meeting all of you for the first time and something unique is happening for the first time. Unintentionally invalidating a client's experience. Yep, identity comes up in a big way with that. Competency number 5, not knowing. That's right, because as coaches, we're supposed to be aware of all the competencies and let them go at the exact same time, right? Brilliant. So in this presentation, in this 90 minutes, I'm going to be doing a lot more of this. And the thing that I'm not really getting into right now has everything to do with identity. Because when we are at the edge, when we are experiencing these moment-to-moment awarenesses that something new is emerging, something is happening that we can't control, where there's risk and uncertainty, we tend to start really worrying about how other people are going to perceive us. And when we start doing that, identities start to flood our heart and mind. The way in which I really want you to see me and the way in which I really do not want you to see me. And our social identities and our cultural identities have a big part to play in that, plus all these other identities that we connect with just the title of being a coach. So I want us to explore what vulnerability feels like for us individually. I hope we get better at naming it and noticing it so that we can actually utilize it for the incredible insight that it offers us when it's happening in a coaching conversation. And I want us to do some work on naming the identities, the things that get in the way, the things that serve us, but more importantly, I think the identities that get in the way and keep us from being seen as the coach, because we start worrying too much about how we are being seen in the moment by the client. It is a very, very, it's a way of microscopically getting into that energetic connection that happens between a coach and a client. And quite honestly, between every human being and every single interaction that we have. So that's it for me in terms of what I'm going to be presenting and talking on. I'm happy to answer any questions if that's how you want to go, or turn it over to the next speaker.
I'm sure there'll be some questions or even some comments or reactions to what you said. But I personally want to say that I love that question that you put in, what's at risk in a coaching session? Because that's really vulnerable when you're sitting with a group of peers and you want to, be seen for what is risky for you as a coach. So thank you for that. It had me thinking too. And I want to open it up to people.
I have a question for you, Ariane. Would you give an example of an identity of mine or of an individual that gets in the way of the coaching process?
So I used some of what came up in the chat. So when I feel like I don't know something, the identity that gets in the way is me wanting to be the expert. The identity that gets in the way is me wanting to have all the answers.
Gotcha.
The identity that gets in the way is some idealized version of what is supposed to be in
Gotcha.
my understanding of what's happening in the moment.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for asking.
If I sense somehow in my body or knowing that I have an identity that I need to get out of the way, how do I address that without making the session about me?
That's why we coaches do so much work behind the scenes, right? So, I mean, part of what we'll be doing is exercises in kind of brainstorming with ourselves and probably in some small groups, because it turns out most of us have a lot of the same perceived identities that we hold, idealized identities and feared identities. I'm trying to think if anybody has done, I'm blanking on the name right now, but it's imposter is an identity. Being an imposter is an identity. So I think when we do the backstage work of getting clarity around it, and then kind of like, where does that identity come from? I do believe our social identities impose identities on us that we sometimes think we have to live into. And culturally, we all come from a lot of different narratives that inform what we think good is. And so we have to do that backstage work on this identity, this identity, this identity. This is how I don't want to be seen. This is how I don't want to be seen. Because then we can get better on noticing it. And then we have to like breathe through it. I mean, sometimes it's breathing, but I know I'm not the only coach in this room who in the middle of a coaching conversation is kind of having like 3 levels of conversation in their head, right? You're connecting with somebody on a body level. You're connecting with an interpretation of what they said. You're tying that back to what they said 15 minutes ago. You're tying it to the future-oriented goals of your engagement. And at the same time, you're noticing how you feel in your own body. So we are very used to, as coaches, I think, operating with awareness of what's happening inside of us. And then I do hope we do some somatic work in that session to learn how to move through it. So when we become aware of it, we can. But I also think it's a really important clue when it happens, like something big's about to happen.
Jonathan has something.
Yeah, I'm curious, and maybe this is for your session, Ariane, or for another time, but it seems to me that if you pull on these threads you're talking about, at some point you get to this sense of ego, like in terms of what's at stake, and that there's a developmental piece of, is it okay to not know? Is it okay to be wrong? Or
Yes.
does that somehow jeopardize something important to you? Does that fit with the
So-
way you look at things?
Yes, I mean, I think this is why I find the domain of spirituality the central domain for me that kind of encompasses all the others, because it is the place where I can see the distinction between my egoic self, the self that wants to perform, and the self that, I don't know how else to say this except with coaches, we do know nothing from moment to moment in a coaching conversation. Something new is happening in every single second of a conversation, and maintaining our curiosity, maintaining coaching mindset. So can I be perfectly honest and vulnerable with all of you? I failed my recorded exam the first time. I failed it because having facilitated for 15 years, having led through a pulpit where you kind of tell people a little bit of what to think every week, it was so hard for me to let go of not being the expert in a coaching conversation. But that's what I had to do. And it was terrifying to my ego, because the whole first half of my life was building up that ego, right? Of being the person who could stand there and preach and teach and facilitate. But then I have to be in a space with a human being where I do have to let go of knowing. So Jonathan, I think it's exactly what you just said. When you pull on the strings, you pull on and strengthen your ability to stay in curiosity, to stay open to not knowing, which is where the magic happens. Because then the client reveals what the knowing is, not you.
Yeah, and therefore, I mean, breathing can be incredibly helpful, but that's not the answer by itself. If inside you're still needing to be right.
Oh, there is no answer. And that's the thing. It all comes down to there is no answer. There's awareness, and there's getting more and more comfortable with our own humanity as coaches. And the fact that we too will experience all the same feelings that our clients will experience, which is, why we care so much about being in the space with them. Thank you for bringing that question.
Thanks.
And thank you, Ariane, for giving us a taste of this conversation about identities. I'm ontologically trained, so I'm always in for anything that has to do with embodiment. All right, looking forward to that. So we're going to move to our second guest today. So Christina Stathopoulos, am I saying it correctly, Christina? Yes, all right. I had coaching. proudly shares that she is a coach, leader, mother, daughter, sister, witch, and wife. A first generation Greek American. Can you hear all the identities layered in here in her intro, right? A first generation Greek American, Christina loves to share her experience with others about being an immigrant's daughter. She was raised in the Greek Orthodox faith and calls herself a witchy child of God. She is queer, autistic, and white. She also identifies as an avid gardener and my personal favorite, beer brewer. So thank you very much. Um, and the title of her presentation at the conference is Honoring the Lived Experience and Honoring Lived Experience, a Trust-First Approach to Mindset Shifts. So she'll be giving us a little preview today. And Christina, just like with Ariane, I'd like to invite you to just name what is your connection with coach training?
Sure. Thanks so much, Jim, and thanks for the thoughtful introduction. And the last name coaching, it means a lot to me to hear my identity of being Greek is honored in that way. So I am a senior program leader for Accomplishment Coaching, which is a coach training school with both a level 1 and level 2 accreditation. I have been leading with that organization for almost 9 years now, and I am also a mentor coach to various coaches working on gaining their PCC through the ICF.
Great. Okay, I'll turn the microphone over to you now.
Sounds good. So first of all, thank you all so much for having me. Ariane, thank you so much for going first and taking the step of setting the tone and bringing people into the conversation. Earlier we were talking about creating tastes. I don't know about you all. I'm a total foodie and I love to look up the menu before I even get to the restaurant. I love to get a sense of what it is I might get as an appetizer or an entree or even a dessert. And I share that because for your consideration, given how much of my presentation I hope will be more experiential during the conference day itself, for today, I've created the menu. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of what we can expect. Unfortunately, that means we won't get as much of the juicy reflection and experience that I hope to co-create with you all if you join me during my session, but hopefully we'll make do. Does that sound good to everyone? Great. The other thing that I just want to put in here is what I have found for myself in yes, absolutely. What I have found for myself in working through this topic is it can bring stuff up for people. And I think especially regardless if you're coming into this space as a coach or a coach trainer, an educator, or just dipping your toes into the coaching industry, when looking at things like lived experience, identity, the possibility of causing harm, I think we can get a little precious, a little fragile, and perhaps even a little scared. I know for myself, I often default to, well, how do I know I'm going to get this right? What answers are you going to give me to make sure I never step in it, to make sure I never miss something, to make sure, especially I know for myself as a white woman, that I don't invalidate someone else's experience, that I don't take the mic from someone when I shouldn't have, all of those different pieces. So I share all that because I imagine in this diverse audience that we are all coming to this conversation at different places in our journey and in our learning. And what I really invite you all to try on, both in this preview and also during the fullness of my session, is less of a focus on having all the answers to get it right, and more so just checking in on where you are in this journey, checking in on what this conversation may bring up for you, the feelings, the body sensations, and what may be the work for you to take on as you move forward from this session. So with that in mind, I want you all to take a moment to think of a time where you were coached or you were coaching someone else, or perhaps you were even working with training coaches in some of these transformational spaces. And my hunch is at one point or another, you've come across a belief that felt hard to shift. Something like, I'm not enough, or I have to work twice as hard, or it's not safe to take up space. Across the industry, I find that often we've named these thoughts as limiting beliefs, disempowered beliefs, disempowered stories. Choose your jargon of choice, but is everyone familiar with kind of categorizing these beliefs as I'm describing them now? So the question that inspired this session was, well, what if these things aren't just personal limiting beliefs, but things that have arisen from both cultural, ancestral, and even systemic survival strategies? And if that's the case, how do we honor both what I think many people see as the mission of coaching and coach training, which is to create shifts in mindset, but also honor the identities and lived experiences that have birthed some of these mindsets and reinforced them? So my bottom line, if nothing else, is yes, mindset is positioned as a gateway to transformation. Absolutely. And I would assert most of us, if not all of us, have had that transformational experience at some point in our journeys, whether receiving coaching, receiving training, coaching others, etc. But it is my assertion that when we attempt to shift mindset without first honoring the lived experience that shaped it, we risk three things: bypassing identity, causing unintended harm, and ultimately reinforcing dominant cultural narratives. So ironically, we end up asking clients to feel more empowered by first asking them to disown parts of who they are. Doesn't that sound a little backwards when you hear it that way? And so I really believe that this is where we as an industry, it's time to take a pause and take a look. Because I don't think the question is, how do we fix limiting beliefs? But rather, one question I invite you all to try on is, how do we hold those beliefs with enough care to understand why they're there? And then look at what's possible now. So to briefly share an example, I was supervising a coach who was working with a client. This client, to give a little context, was an immigrant woman of color who held the belief, I have to be perfect to be safe at work. The coach quickly moved towards a reframe. Oh, what if you didn't have to be perfect? What if you were already enough? And on the surface, that's a lovely shift. And perhaps we might even hear things like great open-ended questions or great challenging the current belief. However, this particular client shut down when asked those things. As I unpacked this with my mentee, what we took a look at is that the belief wasn't just internal. It came from years of racialized workplace experiences, visa precarity, and generational messages for this person. What she needed wasn't a mindset shift yet. She needed acknowledgement. She needed partnership. And that moment became a turning point for how that coach approached mindset work moving forward. So you may be wondering, how can we go about doing this in a 90-minute session? So I want to chat a little bit about what we'll be exploring during the 90 minutes that we have. First, I am going to go ahead and do my homework. I'm going to walk you all through identity in the International Coaching Federation's core competencies. And you may wonder, why? Academia, rules, lessons, no. But here's what I think it's important. It demonstrates that identity honoring approaches are fundamentally aligned and necessary for embodying the ethics and core values of coaching. Because at least in my experience and in the spaces I've occupied in the coach world, it seems like those two are at a contention point. Either you cause transformation or you honor people where they're at. And so my hope is by looking at the core competencies, specifically as they've been revised since 2019, we have an opportunity to see identity is fully weaved into coach mastery and coach education. Secondly, we are going to take a little bit of time as a group to create a working definition of lived experience. Partially because I find the phrase can hold a lot of weight and it doesn't always mean the same thing to the same group of people. To try on for the remainder of this preview, consider what I'm referring to is not just what someone has been through, but actually how identity, culture, and systemic context shape what that experience means. And so we're going to do this in a couple of different ways. For one, I look forward to guiding the group in an opportunity to look at how our own identities, histories, all those things have shaped our beliefs. And most importantly, how they've been a part of the design in what we later go on to call a limiting belief or context. And then afterwards, we'll move through an exercise to support you in being able to recognize where there are opportunities for coaching versus possibilities of causing discouragement, erasure, or harm. So as a little bit of a preview of that first point that I mentioned, I just invite you all to reflect for a moment. There's no need to share, but you're welcome to put things in the chat if you feel moved to do so. But I just invite you to identify now in this moment, what's one belief you've carried that's served you deeply at one point, but eventually became a limitation? And as you land on that belief, and don't worry about finding the right one or perfectly articulating what it is. Again, I'm not grading you and you don't have to share it. As you come into what that belief is, I want you to gently ask yourself, what identities, cultures, or systems might have shaped that belief? Was it your race, your gender, your upbringing, your neurotype? Thank you so much, Joanna, Jonathan, and Hallie for sharing the chat. So these are some of the questions I would encourage you all to bring into the coaching space, not just so that your clients move towards being more empowered, but that they can actually feel more seen by you in those spaces. Same for trainees. So the third course in this menu, so to speak, will be identifying common pitfalls. So in other words, naming and unpacking common missteps in mindset shift work as it pertains to this conversation of honoring lived experience. And we're going to do it in a particular way, which is the participants of the session are going to have a chance to examine coaching scenarios where mindset shifting bypassed identity, followed by facilitated discussion. So these are genuine scenarios pulled from mentee recordings and adapted from real life stories that have taken place in coach training rooms as well as coaching sessions, all of which have been shared with me. I have permission to use all of these for the purpose of this conversation and for this education, and I'm so grateful for that. And then last, but certainly not least, probably my favorite part is we'll get into introducing some client-first, trust-centered approaches that will hopefully support you all in this conversation of how do I honor identity, and in turn will support promoting safety, client agency, and embodied partnership in the coaching space, in the training space. And like I said, this is one of my favorite parts because we'll return to those scenarios as well as offer some additional ones to put what we've been learning and distinguishing into practice. And so my hope is that by the end of this portion of the session, you will all feel more confident in integrating the lessons of the session and actually see in real time your ability to address coaching and address training in a way perhaps you couldn't have before the session began. So to bottom line it and to start to wrap things up here, like I said, I really believe we're at a moment in the coaching profession where we're being called to more depth, more integrity, more responsibility. Clients are coming in with intersectional identities and complex lived experiences, and they're not just asking for goals anymore. They're asking to be met as whole people. If we keep treating mindset work like it's separate from identity, it's my assertion that we're going to miss the mark. And more importantly, we're going to miss them. And so it's my hope that this preview and the session itself sparks curiosity, courage, and a deeper commitment to coaching the whole human and not just mindset. If you're a coach, educator, or trainer who wants to hold identity with as much skill and reverence as you hold transformational work, I think this is the session for you. We're going to explore real coaching scenarios, be given opportunities to practice in community, and leave with hopefully a more embodied, inclusive approach to evoking awareness in our clients and in our trainees. Because again, it's my assertion that honoring lived experience isn't a detour from coaching, it's the path to doing it masterfully. So thank you so much.
And thank you, Christina. The phrasing you used right near the end of that sounded like an advertisement for the conference and for ACTO itself. Yeah, I love how you articulated it. Yes, everyone is showing up with some degree of intersectionality. And for those of us, and I know some of you in the room also do global work. We're, on top of that factor, intersectionality, we also have the reality that many of us are coaching in people who are in cultures different from our own, or we're coaching people who are living in a culture that's different from their native culture. And so we've got so many layers of things that are happening. Again, delightful that you're bringing this into us. So anyone have a question or observation they'd like to engage with Christina around? We've got a couple minutes. He says he has a story that coach training. Wait, what does that say? Coach training is reluctant and lacks the ability to make aware, teach about the significance of experience, culture, and systemic oppression. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is part of the soup, I think, that this conference is happening in, Steve, is, do coach training organizations in general know how to teach this?
Yeah, and I'd be curious, just maybe further, Christina, to get your opinion and perspective on that in terms of the topic that you are certainly expert in. If you feel or see where that does, you've mentioned where it does align with the ICF competencies. And I think my question really is around, okay, great, it may align with those ICF competencies, or at least one or two of them. How is it being taught to potential coaches?
Yeah, it's
and it's not uniform, it's not standard, it's one-off. Some training organizations do engage in your topic, and I would imagine there are some that don't. And I would wonder if they, if one of the issues is, one, a mindset to do it, and then two, the ability to go there. So not for a discussion here, but maybe another conversation further down the road.
absolutely. Thanks for bringing the inquiry, Steve. And, to your point, I think you're just highlighting what I would assert is a pretty significant gap in the current coach education model. And so thanks for your acknowledgement. I do not perceive myself as an expert in this space. I just have a lot of heart, I think. and a lot of passion. And so if nothing else, I hope that conversations like this session, like the various sessions at the conference, can help to spark coach trainers and educators in thinking, okay, so how do we do this? It's more approachable than we realized. It's more embedded than we realized. How can we let go of, you know, our attachment to mastery education and status and really look towards what is the evolution of the industry to serve all of its people and not just the people that, you know, can figure it out themselves or are higher up on the privilege ladder, so to speak.
Okay. Well, thank you again. Thank you, Steve, for your observation. And of course, I think we could probably all agree that to some extent there is no such thing as an expert in this topic. The point is that we're having conversation about it. We are collaborating, you know, like notice all these words begin with con, with. We are evolving together. We are challenging the profession and the training system to evolve in this conversation. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Dagrudi now to bring in our final preview.
Thank you, Jim. To everybody and to the people who've already just spoken, Ariane, Christina, I am noticing my ears feel like they're being there's a spa going on, and there's a nice sense of receiving and being nourished with this, and also the way we all are engaging. So, and it's on that note of expanse that I want to invite our next speaker in, and want to talk about Damaris Patterson Rice, and a little bit about how Damaris introduces herself as a straight cis Black woman, 53, divorced mother of biracial teenage twins. Wow. Non-denominational and ecumenical human, nerdy, gentle lady. She's the only daughter of 2 teachers, first-generation master's degree, born and raised in corporate financial services and people and leadership development for 30 years. HR in training and development and working at private practice in 2016, and is faculty at the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland. And Damaris, I want to invite you in with all that you have for us today.
Can everyone see the screen? Good. All right. Thank you, Judy, and thank you, Jim. Hello, everyone. I'm Damaris Patterson Price, and I wanted to say a few words about the topic I'll be covering at the conference, which will deal with culture and its impacts on the learning space. As I was thinking about a metaphor to kind of capture it, the following clip kind of came to mind for me.
This is the construct. It's our loading program. We can load anything from clothing to equipment, weapons, training simulations, anything we need.
For me, that described the space between, for me, that described the space between coach, client, coach, trainer, and learners, that there was this space, this co-created space. And what's tricky about that construct, however, is that everything each of the members embodies, everything I am culturally, everything you are culturally, is loaded into that space, even if it includes things we cannot see. And that actually is most of culture. Most of culture is invisible, yet it's there in the room. And I think that gives coaches and coach trainers a really interesting responsibility. And I think that responsibility is really to lift and prioritize co-creating that open construct that's being filled, and doing that by working on increasing my humility, increasing my curiosity, my competence and confidence, but also proving myself to be both ready and willing to support whatever emerges, even the stuff, the scary stuff that might emerge, the stuff that you may not be or think you're not prepared to handle. Again, being willing and ready to embrace that. And finally, by seeing the learner's culture or the client's culture as not a problem that we've got to manage or avoid or ignore, but rather as something really, really positive that informs and enhances what is my burgeoning coaching practice if I am your coaching student. Going a little bit deeper about the topic, I'm going to be covering a number of things. So what is that what's in that coaching learning construct? What is culture? What are the risks of ignoring it? And then I'm going to share some best practice on how to embrace whatever comes up there. But I thought I'd say a few words about what culture is. And usually when we bring up the C word, the big 8 are what come up for most individuals. But given all that culture could be, I really wanted to give you a glimpse of what's actually in that coaching learning construct with you. There's going to be a lot on the page, and I don't want you to be intimidated by it. In the session, we're actually going to do an exercise about it with it, but I wanted to show you a little bit of what it is. What you're seeing here are just 16 cultural categories, and many, many layers relative to just 16 cultural categories. And so imagine that you and you're my coaching trainer, I'm your coaching student or learner. We're in that open construct together in which everything you are, everything I am is entering. And some of that's depicted here, but also what follows, because culture doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in society, a society that responds to it, a society that responds to it based on how valuable that society thinks it is. And so not only are the mix of whatever we are entering the room, but also my lived experience relative to how society handles or responds to what we both are as cultural beings. How does society respond to you as a cultural being? Comes with you. How society responds to me comes with me. And so as the coach or as the coaching trainer, are you ready to hold all of that? So again, in summary, everything you are culturally is in this learning construct. Everything you're not is also in the coaching construct, in that you may have thoughts about or think you know about those things. And then everything, again, your beliefs, your biases. And when I say everything, I mean not only cultural experiences, but the social experience, so societal responses that, again, happen relative to all of our cultural layers. My cautionary note is that the business case behind paying attention to these things, despite their discomfort, are really numerable. But the one I really wanted to hone in on in terms of a caution, in terms of a business case, why is it that we want to concern ourselves even with those things that we may not see, that exist and are walking into the construct with us, is because often leaders in learning spaces, whether that's the coach or whether that's the coaching teacher, if they are ignoring or feel intimidated by or unable or unwilling to hold space for these things, what you see is a tendency to rely on common organizational and social codes that are rooted in supremacy. And when I say they're rooted in supremacy, that's not just one kind of supremacy, but a myriad of supremacies. But all of them have a couple things in common. One, they tend to resist change. Any change that I, as your student, might be bringing to my way of interpreting your lessons. And these, again, items, these codes rooted in supremacy tend to favor closed and homogeneous systems. And so when I think about, for example, how I learned coaching at the Gestalt Institute and at other institutes, sometimes the way that they taught coaching to me, the permissions they gave me relative to how I could manifest my coaching was rather closed, rather homogeneous, and was very resistant to the cultural flavor I might want to bring to it. And so let me give you a couple of examples of what this might look like. And so it might be the coach or the coach trainer's avoidance of stress. You know, diversity creates a bunch of tension. Tension is bad, hence I'm not talking about it. Or it could be the coaching trainer's worship of the written word. If it's not in the manual, if it's not in the model, it's not existent and we're not dealing with it. It could be the coach trainer's belief in only one right way to coach. This is the way it's done, or this is the way I do it. That's what I'm teaching, and that's all I'm going to smile on. It could be the trainer's belief in the myth of universality, the coaching trainer in that space saying to themselves, you know what, I feel engaged and I feel included and I feel a sense of belonging, hence it's safe to assume that everyone does. It could be also the trainer's belief in the right to comfort. I don't know how to talk about culture. Culture makes me uncomfortable. Thus, we're not discussing it here. It's not relevant here. It's not on the docket here. Or I'm going to punish it when my learners bring it up, or I'm going to ignore it when my learners bring it up. And so again, I share this with you as a taste of what is to follow in my seminar, where again, we'll talk about relative to this construct that, like the Matrix, is loaded with everything you as a trainer, everything you as a coach are bringing with you, and also how society responds to all of that. I'm bringing everything I am as your learner or as your client, as well as how society responds to that. And then what is your both competency and willingness to be able to hold all that could emerge, especially given all of the blind spots and dark spots that could exist in that construct. A little taste of what I'm bringing. What questions might I answer?
Thank you, Damaris. And if you want to take the presentation off, then we can see more of you. And I must say, I loved it, the provocative nature of what you're asking people to consider and think about. And being a coach trainer, it was, it was just lovely to read and just be confronted with all of it all over again. So I think it's power-packed. What's a question you would love to be asked?
What's a question I would love to be asked? That's interesting. That's a great question.
Damn coaches.
I would love to be asked how to create the psychological safety that makes all of your learners, no matter what they are or who they are, and no matter what you are or who you are, what are the elements of psychological safety that you as the leader in that space can foster, so as to not create a sense of otherness. I'll give you an example. I was in coaching school and I was the only person of color, only woman of color in the room, about 30 people, very nice white people, very nice white people. But when you're in coaching school, often we learn ourselves as, we use ourselves, we're kind of our own test dummies, And so the exercise had a lot to do with kind of what felt like autopsies, cutting myself open and letting all my guts spill out onto the floor to be used as fodder so that we could practice on each other. And I saw my very nice white colleagues doing this with ease and comfort each other and attend to each other with ease. But I could hear my grandmother's voice in my head saying, don't you dare talk to these
Mm.
white folks about who you really are, what your fears are, don't do that. I could hear her like I can hear all of you. And thus I shut down and was got an instant headache and was irritated and angry and I didn't even have the words to articulate why, other than this program was asking me to do things that every ounce of my culture was telling me not to do. Be in my body. My grandmother in my voice is saying, don't you dance for these white folks. Open up yourself and bare your soul. Again, my grandmother's voice saying, don't you dare do that. And so luckily I had some really, really effective trainers who, once I could articulate it, attended to me. And it came to a place where I was able to tell the 30 colleagues in the room, you're very nice white people. However, my history teaches me to be very slow and reluctant to bare my soul, because since we don't have perhaps common lived experience, I worry that you won't be able to help sew it up again.
Mhm.
And so here I'm going to be left all open and bloody and, vulnerable. And again, and left there with my ass out, so to speak, and no way to be restored. And so I would hope that I'm doing this work talking about this so that that doesn't happen to others.
Mhm. Mhm.
Thank you.
I haven't
I'd
got a
like to-
question, but I've got an observation which I'd like to bounce off you, which is my team and I do a lot of work in the Middle East. And we've been working there for a long time. And if you take a place like Saudi Arabia, the combination of different cultures there, one of the things that we found is that the contracting phase of any coaching becomes a million times more important around confidentiality, because a bit like some of your lived experience, there are people there who have ended up in Saudi Arabia because that was the only place they were going to make some money.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not often good to talk about the fact that you're Syrian or Yemeni or whatever. And we found that the fact that we're outsiders and international,
Mm-hmm.
and we're very careful about the contracting phase and talk a lot about confidentiality.
Mm-hmm.
I think that brings some of the elements of psychological safety to it. But I'd be interested in your view, because I guess I'm looking for practical stuff.
I'm a very pragmatic person, and so that's what I'm going to
That's
offer.
great.
But I would say even before contracting, it begins with recruiting. Because the first thing I did, because I took many classes at the Gestalt Institute and other places before I actually went to coaching school. And the first thing I do is look around the room for faces like mine. And they don't even have to be Black, drop dead gorgeous faces like mine. They can be just others.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how, if you read the book, for example, why are all the Black kids sitting at the same table in the lunchroom? You know that, for example, often marginalized groups will find each other by the eyes and kind of have this unspoken agreement, like, okay, if something jumps off, I got you, or I see you, or we nod. And so representation in the room, even before the session starts or your program starts, being very intentional about that, I think can go a long way. It would have been a different experience had there been someone else like me in the room, because I would have felt more comfortable that, one, I'd be understood, and two, what I thought or think are my unique, whether true or not, what I think are my unique lived experiences would be safely attended to.
one of my Arab colleagues says there needs to be 3 of you in the room.
30, well, and
Because
also,
one person is just, well, it's just her.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Whereas 3 is kind of an enclave. It's a support group.
I would say 3 out of 10.
Okay,
3 out of 10, 30%.
cool. Thank you very much.
Happily, happily.
I have another experience that was pretty recent where I am intending to help my coaching school have people bring their cultural bios. So we brought it into a class and we did all this and I did this with another woman of mixed heritage. I'm white, lesbian, but I pushed way too hard with way too big an examples. We used actually the ACTO board examples. And when I talked with the faculty about it, the Black faculty said, Pam, I don't know how to say this, but this is going way too fast for me. And it helped me just see how I just stepped into, with all my well-meaning stuff, I went too fast. And so I'm so excited to go to everything in this ACTO conference to really help me slow down and really embody all of this. So everything that Christina, and I unfortunately couldn't come from the beginning of this meeting, but what I heard from you, Christina, and now you, Damaris, it's right on target. And I think we may need to help coaching schools like mine, super well-meaning, but wow, we don't know where to start or what that really looks like without me, all of a sudden creating something way too much. So, and that's enough for now.
Thank you, Pam, for what you said about slowing down and looking forward to the conference to help you to do that, because that's exactly the experience I was having. And I was, mentally composing a note to some of my colleagues that something about this call today is shifting and deepening for me what this conference is going to be about, especially in the times that we are in right now and the opportunity that is coming up.
Okay, so we're at the turn here, going into the last quarter hour of our time together. And because this is a conference preview, we want to do a little PR for the conference. So here's where we want to just offer a few reminders. I've just popped some links into the chat. If you have expressed a desire to be at this conference and you have not yet registered, here are multiple things for you to click on. One of them takes you to the front page of the conference. The second link will take you directly to the registration page, and the third to the full schedule, where you will see some of the people in this room and their smiling faces and bios and descriptions on the page. We also want to remind everyone here that we are, this is our second conference where we are moving in fully committed to a pay what you can pricing model. So those of you who can afford the member rate, pay that member rate. And those of you who might have a little bit extra, we invite you to click on one of the options that allows you to pay something into the scholarship fund, so that those who are coming from economically distressed zones or those who can't afford the full package can also attend. We also have a recordings only option available for anyone who can't make those dates. And of course, everyone who attends the conference is going to have access to all the recordings, once we get them all organized after the fact. Just a word about this. We were thrilled with how well this worked the last time we used this pricing model. We ended up having people register for $50, coming from some places, and we ended up literally breaking even across the pricing model, in that the average rate paid hit our target. So thank you for those of you who have the means and the generosity, and please invite anyone you know who might say, I can't afford it. Oh man, those are US dollar rates. Please let them know that they can attend and learn in a way that works for them. Okay.
Please also recommend the quality of the conference. You've witnessed some of it today. Many of us are coach trainers and associated with coach training schools. You have mentees. So spreading the word and having a personal recommendation is one of the best ways for people to make choices. So we really look to you for that too.
Yeah. And I have one more question that I'd like to ask of all three of the presenters today. So I'd ask you just kind of like off the top of your head, what is it about the theme of our conference, Humans First, Embedding Social Identity in Coaching and Coach Training? What is it about that theme that inspired you in terms of what you submitted? Okay, so what is it about that theme that inspired your submission?
I'm happy to answer the question.
Okay.
Courage. We need more spaces where people are courageous. And I feel that the three of us, my two colleagues who shared as well, there's a lot of identities coming into spaces, and there's a lot of ways in which this calls on us to be courageous and to name things that aren't given voice to easily. So I think we need to create more spaces where people can emerge as the courageous individuals they are.
Thank you, Ariane.
I'd say the title brought me to another experience where I became very aware of how privileged I and the colleagues in the room were to be able to sit around for days at a time thinking about thinking, right? And that is almost criminally privileged, right? Especially when I think about being born and raised on Copley Road, born to two teachers who worked other jobs to send me to sit around a room thinking about thinking is such a privilege. And I'm not making fun of it as in it's not valuable, because I thought, how much more safe and wonderful would the world be if other people who can't afford to do that could somehow be able to access that knowing, that inner knowing, because the wilderness isn't out here, the wilderness is in here. And so that's what I learned mostly from coaching, is how to manage inside. And I know there are communities that would benefit from access to that. So that's what brought me here.
Thank you, Damaris. Thank you.
Yeah, really want to acknowledge the contributions already to the question. And I think for myself, part of what inspired me to apply to speak was a helpful nudge from a colleague. But also, Steve, if I may, thank you so much for authentically sharing the experience that you had in coach training spaces. And those experiences that I know I created early on in my coach education days, like I was part of it, right? Like I've perpetuated harm. I've used ontology and mindset as a scapegoat for having to do my work. And as I continue to unpack that in my journey, the theme of humans really inspired me, because what are we doing this for? We're not doing it for the words or the jargon or the titles, I hope. We're doing it for the people. And so, again, I actually struggled with, if I could be really honest, I struggled with applying to the conference, because I was like, what one more nice white lady talking about identity like she knows what she's doing, which I don't, but hopefully this is the space to make messes as well, and the space to encourage all of us to move the conversation forward and not worry about harder, better, faster, perfect, just moving ahead, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Beautifully put. There is great value in inviting in all voices and admitting that none of us know, that we are making it up as we go. The colleagues who hear from me a lot will all laugh at this. I am a huge fan of open space technology, which I've been using for decades, and I see some head noddings around the room. You know, it's an approach to anything. You could approach any part of life, or certainly any kind of a learning opportunity, through the 4 principles, one of which is, you know, whatever happens is the only thing that could have happened, right? Whoever shows up are the right people. You know, the philosophy of open space is about inviting an open space in which things can happen. And we throw some prompts into the room, you know, to create a container for that happening. And we don't know what will happen. Maybe magical things. Maybe magical things, but certainly learning for everyone. And it sounds like, including our speakers who are all ready to learn in the space as well, which is absolutely fabulous. Thank you. Let's see, Jagruti, let me check with you. Is there anything else we need to say to people before we start to close? No, we're
I
good.
don't think I left out any information, but I do want to say thank you.
Yes. Thank you to all 3 of you who showed up, ready to share. Thank you to those of you who showed up to hold the space. Thank you to the rest of you who are helping contribute to our conference. And thank you to everyone for getting registered for the conference, if you aren't already. And on that note, we delight in giving people a few extra minutes of time at the end of a program like this. So how about if we give you all back 4 or 5 minutes of your day, and whether it's morning or afternoon or late evening in Jagruti's case. And we will see you all in some of our upcoming events in June. So thanks, everyone. Bye-bye now.
Bye. Shall we stay back, Jim, for debrief?